Hi! I know it's been about 2 weeks now since that Loki show finished, but I'm gonna make my review of it right now anyway. I know, I didn't really make a review for Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I'll talk about that later in the review, but I did make one for WandaVision. And so, it's now time for me to make one about Loki. And, is Loki a show? Well, is it a good show? Is it a bad show? These questions will be answered right now, because that is what a review is for. And I am doing a review today, because it's a review video. If you watched my WandaVision review, you'd have noticed that I reviewed that show in a very odd way. I reviewed it on an episodic basis, with me going through each episode one by one. Now, since Loki doesn't follow WandaVision's distinct style, in that each episode is set in a different era of television, I'm not going to do the same stuff for Loki, so I'm not going to do episode 1 and episode 2 and episode 3. I'm going to muddle them all up. I'm going to instead go through each key factor in what I believe makes Loki a good or bad show. So things like visuals, world building, characters, romance, and the way it concludes itself overall. To kick things off though, I should loosely outline what the show's about, and given this review is likely to go into depth in regards to the show, I'm going to give you that obligatory spoiler warning right now. So if you haven't seen the show yet, I suggest you go watch it. I really suggest you go watch it, because it is a good show. I like the show. Now, you may be hearing rain in the background. I don't know if you can hear it, but in case you hear it, I'm going to bring it up. There is rain in the background, so if you hear some thunder or some rain, well, that is the background. That is God getting mad at me for making this review about Loki. If I were to sum up the idea of this show, it'd be a little something like this. Loki was just defeated by the Avengers in the first Avengers movie, but found himself able to sneak away with the Tesseract. In doing this, he set off alarms in the soon-to-be known about TVA, an organization dedicated to maintaining the timeline. So, the TVA capture Loki and sentence him to be pruned. This basically means removing him from existence entirely, but only that one variation of Loki. It doesn't affect all of them. Now, it just so happens that someone in the TVA would actually like to use this Loki to search for a different variation of Loki. Whoever this variation of Loki is to be discussed later, but if you did see the show, you would know her to be Sylvie. By the end of the show, both Lokis are successful in tracking down the person in charge, and they successfully destroy the TVA. Now, when I say that they successfully destroy the TVA, I'm gonna have to put that in quotation marks, because they kinda destroy the TVA and they kinda successfully destroy it. Anyway, I guess I should clarify my thoughts about the show before going into the full-on review, and so I'll say that I did actually enjoy the concept of the show quite a lot. And I feel like this show served to be, like WandaVision, a good change in pace in terms of MCU material. Now, the first thing I have to comment on is the overall length of the show. For those who don't know, you should probably already know this though, the show consisted of 6 one-hour-long episodes. Now, this is like in the range between 15 minutes and an hour, not really an hour per se, but it is basically an hour-long episode. While it could be argued that the plot suited the 6 hours provided, I would argue that the show included some forced moments of slower pacing, simply to extend the show to fit that 6-hour range. In an ideal world though, personally, I would have liked to see this show be the same size as WandaVision in terms of its episodes. That's 9 episodes long, with 1-hour segments instead of those half-an-hour segments in WandaVision. But I feel like if this were the case, it would have greatly reduced the pacing even more. Because the show is only 6 hours long, this wasn't too much of an issue, as I feel like the pacing wasn't that bad overall, because of the fact it wasn't 9 hours long. It was only really the office scenes that were a bit slow in terms of pacing, with the other stuff being quite good, and the finale being slow paced, but it worked. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was a bit of the same, but I'm not going to get into that too in depth, because while it was also 6 episodes long, I did feel like that show handled it a bit better than Loki. I don't know why, but it just handled it a bit better. However, one thing I think the show excels at are its visuals. This is pretty much because of the fact there are so many different settings within this show, despite it only being 6 episodes long, allowing each episode to feel fresh compared to the ones before it. For example, the episode Lamentis, I think that's the 3rd episode, sees Loki and Sylvie, the female variant of Loki, stranded on a strange purple alien planet. No, this is not FATWS, this is a planet called Lamentis. The design of this planet was, in my opinion, really cool and set the tone really well for the entire episode. The other episodes involved the setting of the TVA, which seemed to be a sort of 1950s style area, with it purposefully having bland colours. I didn't mind this that much, because I thought this served to be a great contrast when comparing it to all the other areas in the show. And of the areas that did contrast with it, besides Lamentus, there was the episode in Area 5, of which I forgot the name of. Was it The Void? I think that was the name of the area. Was that its name? I don't remember, but it doesn't matter, because the name isn't what's important here. It is the visuals of the area, and the visuals of this area was pretty cool too, with there being tons of Easter eggs scattered throughout the entire terrain, and the villain of this area is something I also enjoyed, especially because it looked pretty damn cool for being a cloud. The battle that took place between old Loki, yes, there is an old man version of Loki, and the quote-unquote villain, was really quite a spectacle to see. The finale too had great visuals with the mansion, question mark, I don't know if it's actually a mansion, but that had a lovely purple tinge similar to Lamentus, while also having some pulsation going on to switch up the atmosphere a bit. So I'm frankly unable to critique anything here in regards to how the show looks. I guess you could mention that some of the CGI or some of the magic stuff looked a bit low budget for Marvel, but I didn't mind it that much. Now, besides the show looking great, there are also the visuals in terms of the fighting scenes to consider. Now, this is pretty much in regards to the choreography of the fighting scenes, and since I'm no expert in regards to the choreography given my stature, I'll try to keep it brief. The fighting scenes, at least the ones involving hand-to-hand combat, were nothing to be wowed by, and were pretty much mediocre by Marvel standards. It was nothing like the fighting scenes of Black Widow, or even Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and so sadly dragged down the show overall. Luckily, there weren't many hand-to-hand fight scenes in the show, as it mostly involved using magic and or intellectual competitions. Anyway, given the ending of the show, it's clear that hand-to-hand combat was not the focus, and so I can't fault it for too much for having mediocre fighting scenes. What is clear to me then is the fact that the focus of the show was placed on its characters and overall world building instead of its fighting scenes. When making a show like this, a lot of work needs to be put into the world in which the characters are, and so Loki takes a lot of time in the first 2 episodes setting up what it's like to live and work in the TVA. I personally enjoyed this a lot, particularly because I feel like the show established the TVA in a way that made it seem interesting. For example, in the first episode, you get to learn about how the TVA deals with its variants. Loki, being a variant himself, is put through this very rigorous process, and when Mobius takes Loki for himself, it is made clear how important the TVA actually is. In one of the scenes, Loki stumbles across the Infinity Stones, but these stones are being used as paperweights. They're actually Infinity Stones. It's just that the TVA is leagues beyond these stones in terms of power, and so sees them as useless clutter. This I found was a really good way at establishing the absolute dominance of the TVA, while also serving to be a good comedic moment. The show does this a few other times, and so the world building is something that I can actually praise the show for doing well. This is also true with the contained episodes, so the one where they're on Lamentus and the one where in the Void, as both these episodes are also successful in establishing the area fairly well. Now, because they are contained, they don't really go into much depth in terms of establishing these areas, because you will only see them once, and so they're not recurring areas. One of the best things about this show are its characters. Now, not all of the characters are great, but most of them are good. Before I get into each of the main characters, I should first talk about those who I felt weren't completely engaging. And so, here we go. First up is... I forgot her name. I forgot her name. She was the judge lady. She was the woman in charge of the TVA. I can't remember her name. Okay, hold on. Let me look it up. Okay. According to Google, her name is Ravonna Renslayer. Now, I don't remember that name at all, but that's apparently her name. Cool. Maybe I should have rewatched the show before doing this review. Oh well. Anyway, I didn't really like her character, mainly because she never really said what she was doing most of the time. At first, I didn't mind it that much. She was just there to be the standard head of the organization. But then by the end of the show, she really seemed to flip-flop on whether she was for or against the TVA. Like, during her final conversation with Mobius on episode 6, she seemed certain that she was going to continue serving the TVA, despite everything about it being a lie. But then as she's about to leave, she suggests that she was on the side of Mobius all along, or at least she flopped onto his side. But I say suggest because she never actually says anything specific. This made it hard for me to actually like her, as I can actually understand her that much. Now next up is, I don't think there's actually anyone else I didn't like that much. I mean, that says a lot about the show itself, or it says a lot about myself. I don't know. I guess I'll just move on to the good characters. Loki! Loki is Loki. Loki, we should talk about Loki, not the show, even though I'm still talking about the show. I'm talking about Loki the character. Now, Loki the character is someone who I enjoyed a bit too much, but given how he's mostly used for comedy again, I don't see why I would have disliked him. There's probably only one thing I can complain about in regards to Loki the character in the show, and that is his power nerf. See, in the first Avengers movie, literally 10 minutes before the show started, Loki the character is powerful enough to become an Avengers level threat, and is demonstrated as being highly threatening to all the Avengers. But in this show, he is, as stated before, mainly used for comedy. Now, he was used for comedy in the other shows, like, and the other movies, sorry, like Avengers, with Hulk just smashing him left and right. But he easily gets taken down Q-Limiter's train scene, although it could be argued that the first few episodes has Loki the character as prime in terms of his intelligence. Furthermore, I suppose an argument could be made in regards to the TVA disabling all magic, leading to Loki's apparent nerf, but that isn't an excuse for times when Loki the character is not even in the TVA, see Lamentus again. Because this Loki the character comes from the first Avengers movie, all of the character development we saw throughout the Marvel movies is gone. This isn't a bad thing per se, because the Loki the show handles this pretty well. Loki the character gets a little recap session in the first episode, with him witnessing all of the movies after the first original Avengers, and so it didn't really feel like we were about to watch Loki the character go through the same character arc as before. Instead, we get a different character arc, one which involves Sylvie. I did enjoy Sylvie as a character, since she's basically just a Loki, but a woman. She does get her own separate backstory, though it's nothing spectacular. I guess the main thing to talk about here is the romantic relationship she has with Loki the character, of which got a lot of criticism from fans. I think this was the main love it or hate it thing for the show, and I have to say, I kinda love the relationship. Like, think about it. Okay, Loki the character is meant to be this narcissistic, egotistical god. Throughout the movies and even the first episode of the show, it was established that Loki only loves himself. And so it makes perfect sense for Loki to be in a romantic relationship with a variation of himself. Sylvie, as it happens to be, is a Loki too. And so one should assume that she's as egotistical as the others. Though I do have to complain about the way the romance was handled in the show, as I feel like it could have been handled in a much more subtle way. We get too many scenes establishing their feelings, with it all feeling too on the nose. For example, there's a scene in The Void where both Lokis are sitting on a hill, and Loki the character decides to wrap a blanket between them. There's nothing wrong with this scene in theory, but I feel like this was too on the nose for the show, and didn't really establish anything besides, oh my goodness, they're still in love. I should also start talking about the other characters in the show, but I don't really have much to say in regards to them, so I'll just reassure to you now that I haven't forgotten their existence. I've now covered most of which I wanted to cover, and so there's only one thing left to talk about. What is it? Well, it's the finale of the show. Most people may have expected the show to end on a thrilling fight scene, much like how WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier ended, but it didn't. This time around, the show ended with a very long exposition dump. I know what you're thinking though, exposition dump? That's horrible. Well, it actually works really well here. And this episode is probably my favorite episode of the entire series, maybe even of all the shows that we've seen so far. The reason it works well isn't because the conversation takes place in many different areas, or even because the writing is stellar. It's much simpler than that. The reason I really like this episode and the way they conveyed it is because of the main villain. He remains. Jonathan Majors, the person who played this character, I have to say, I was really surprised at how amazing he is in this episode. The way he moved around the room, the way he spoke his lines, the way he interacted with the Lokis, everything was amazing. Some may not have enjoyed this episode as much as I have, but that's fine. You're allowed to dislike this episode. It doesn't have much action, and it's really just a slow-paced exposition dump. So you're free to dislike this episode. I just really liked it. But I feel like the show knew what it excelled at, the world building and character interactions, and so went full on during the finale. If the finale involved a huge fight scene, I really don't know if it would have been that great, given the quality of the other fight scenes in the show, as well as the quality of the single fight scene in the finale between Loki and Sylvie. So I'm glad that the show ended on this note. The slower pace actually worked well in this case, even though I did critique the show earlier on for having slower pacing, and still served to be a memorable moment, and it's probably going to be the reason I'll rewatch this show in the future. That's about it for this review. I have nothing else to say. The character development, world building, and character interactions overall was what made the show amazing for me. The fighting was nothing to go crazy about, and one of the characters was quite confusing, to be frank, but this wasn't enough for me to actually dislike the show. I know a second season is going to be made in the future, and I'm quite excited to see what will happen in that. But for now, I'm gonna have to give the first season of Loki a solid 7 out of 10. I guess I need to explain myself now. Why didn't I review Falcon and the Winter Soldier? Well, it's actually pretty simple. I didn't enjoy the show that much, so I didn't actually care to make a review for it. I only ever review stuff when I have something to say about it, and in the case of the show, I had nothing to say about it, and so I didn't make a review. If you're curious as to what I would have rated it, I'd probably have given it about a 5 out of 10, because it wasn't really special for me. It wasn't really bad, and it wasn't really good. It was just a boring, average Marvel show. So yeah, that's about it. If you like the show, cool. If you like Loki, cool, because I like Loki, cool. And that's it, cool. Okay, cool.